There are few characters who've had the same effect on me as Destiny's Savathun, the Witch Queen, goddess of trickery, cunning, and mother of the Hive. By all accounts, I should hate her. Everything she stands for is something I abhor. She's done terrible things in the pursuit of her goals, and yet she is magnetic. There's something about her that makes me almost want to root for her and see her redeemed. Let's discuss the Witch Queen and why she's my favorite character in the Destiny franchise. Savathun has her roots in the nascent Destiny storyline. She was introduced in the Books of Sorrow, a Hive text recounting their history that was released as grimoire cards accompanying the Taken King in 2015. In the Books of Sorrow, the Hive God King, Oryx, regales the story of the Hive's creation from his perspective. We learn of his two younger siblings, Savathun and Xivu Arath, and their metamorphosis from weak krill into strong Hive by making a deal with the worm gods. 5 gigantic worms that lived deep in the seas of the krill homeworld, Fundament. A symbiotic relationship is established where the Hive consume the worm's offspring, allowing them to feed on the Hive's actions, and in return use the darkness to provide them with immense paracausal power. After metamorphosis, the worm gods direct the newly minted Hive to go on a galactic crusade, destroying civilizations in order to increase their power. The Deep grants Oryx the power of the Throne World, a realm where he would respawn if he was killed. The only way to defeat someone with a Throne World is to kill them inside it. After Oryx was defeated in his Throne World in the Taken King, the Hive returned to the background of the Destiny story, but Savathun, Oryx's younger sister, and the second most powerful Hive god, plotted against those who destroyed her brother. Savathun's next appearance was indirect. She manipulated the Awoken masterfully in concert with the Ahamkara her brother had taken. Riven of 1,000 Voices. Riven used the powerful desire of a fire team of guardians who wanted her dead to grant Savathun one last wish upon her death, the Dreaming City Curse, an infestation of Taken upon the location and awoken Queen Mara's throne world, resetting and regrowing in a cycle every time it was cleansed. Forsaken characterizes Savathun for the first time even though she doesn't appear within it. She's a master manipulator, scheming and creating plots to weaken the Vanguard and the Awoken, and doesn't even need to do anything directly herself. She works behind the scenes. Mara is established as a character foil to Savathun. They play a game of chess across the solar system where the stakes involve the survival of each species. The Hive on one side, the Awoken and humanity on the other. Savathun wins the first round against her ascendant rival, significantly weakening the Awoken, who only survive thanks to guardians who keep the Dreaming City curse at bay, killing wave after wave of Taken invaders. I think it's very fitting to have Savathun's first major appearance be largely off-screen. It helps build her character up as cunning. She doesn't even need to attack us directly to threaten our survival. She can use her pawns one by one to weaken us. The trick of convincing the Vanguard and Awoken to team up and kill Riven to enact the last wish is Savathun's masterstroke. It's a fantastic gambit, sacrificing a powerful piece to enact a devastating endgame like the most sophisticated chess players. I love the way this is written and portrayed in Forsaken. It makes Savathun feel like the greatest threat to the Vanguard before she ever appears on screen. Savathun's next trick is even greater. She takes advantage of a weakened Osiris after he loses his ghost to Xivu Arath's forces, imprisoning him inside his mind and impersonating him in the last city. Here, Savathun learns about the Vanguard, their operations, and most importantly the light in order to enact her next trick. Savathun is further characterized as manipulative and cunning, walking in her enemy's shoes in order to understand them. After nearly destroying the last city via the Vex, Savathun is exposed and manipulates Queen Mara once again into performing a ritual to excise her worm from her body. The ritual succeeds, but Savathun escapes at the last moment, mortally wounded, leaving behind Osiris in a comatose state. Savathun is further characterized as manipulative and cunning, walking in her enemy's shoes in order to understand them. She uses the Vanguard and Queen Mara to solve a problem she's had since her metamorphosis into a Hive goddess. the worm hunger. Savathun noticed that her worm and the worms of her siblings were becoming insatiable as the hive grew in power. She realized that the worms receive more from the relationship with the hive than the hive receive in turn, making the connection more parasitic than symbiotic. Savathun is able to feed her worm via acts of cunning, but even this is becoming problematic. Each time the worms are fed, they require more and more. She decides to free herself of the worm and explore the benefits of the light because she's seen Lightbearers triumph over her older brother. This second gambit is one of survival, which plays out in the campaign of the Witch Queen. Ever since I was a child, I've found lying difficult. This is likely a function of my autism, which sometimes makes me quite literal-minded and prone to a strong sense of internal justice. From a young age, I hated lying and always wanted to know the truth. Anytime I learned I'd been deceived by somebody, I felt distraught and betrayed. As a result, honesty has always been one of my most important values. I don't trust people who intentionally deceive me, and yet I can't stop thinking about Savathun. Her entire nature is to use lies as a tool to extract as much power from deceit and cunning as possible. This is her personal application of the sword logic. When I played the Witch Queen campaign for the first time, I was enthralled by her. It truly is the first time that she steps out of the shadow and into the focus of the story. And when I saw and heard her, I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop thinking about her. This is in part thanks to the stunning performance delivered by voice actress Deborah Wilson, who plays Savathun. She hangs on every word, twisting them, creating intrigue and making every sentence feel of paramount importance. This perfectly matches Savathun's characterization as someone who uses the power of words to their advantage. She crafts narratives, weaving them into tapestries which she can use as illusions to trick her enemies or reveal the truth at the most opportune moment to strike. Listening to Wilson act proves that she's perfectly cast as Savathun. I can't stop listening, trying to divine the meaning of each turn of phrase, hoping I can decipher the truth before it's too late. There's perfect resonance with the story of Witch Queen, a narrative with twists and turns, illusions and reveals about Savathun, the Hive, and the world of destiny. Witch Queen is Savathun's story, literally, narratively, and thematically. There's something almost perversely fascinating about Savathun to me. She's an enigma. Decoding her motivations is difficult, which draws me in. I almost revel in the taboo of seeing someone take glee from deception. It's cathartic to witness someone else behave this way, so profoundly in opposition to what I believe, and yet exude confidence and charisma thanks to an incredible performance. I can't help but respect Savathun because of how the writing and acting crescendo in harmonious resonance. In my mind, the best villains are the ones I can understand and who feel human. I love that the Witch Queen takes the story of the Books of Sorrow and twists the truth. As we unravel the mystery of how Savathun acquired the light, it's revealed that she was fatally wounded after the ritual and visited the Traveler as a supplicant, willing to sacrifice herself for a chance to serve the light. The Traveler sees Savathun's devotion and sends a ghost named Dumaro to resurrect her immediately and turn her into the first Hive Lightbearer. When a new Lightbearer rises from the dead, they lose their memories. This causes Savathun to become confused, retreating to her throne world to figure out what to do next. The Traveler resurrecting someone without their memories represents a kind of regaining of innocence. It's a second chance after death to have someone's slate wiped clean. Only a select few characters have regained some of their memories from before they were risen. This represents a loss of their newfound innocence. After Mars returns to Sol, the Guardian discovers the entrance to Savathun's throne world and investigates, driven by a need for revenge for Savathun's past schemes. Within, they discover that Savathun and her brood of Hive have discovered a way to become Lightbearers. We use the darkness to discover Savathun's past and figure out why she was granted the light. However, this unintentionally gives Savathun her memories back, allowing her to continue to enact her scheme of giving the Hive a new way to survive. She loses her newfound innocence by regaining her memories and beginning to scheme again. Savathun's plan is to perform a ritual that will hide the Traveler away inside her throne world, protecting it from the coming threat of the Pyramid Fleet and its commander, the Witness. The Vanguard fears this may cause them to lose their connection to the light and puts an end to the ritual by uncovering one last memory. Using Savathun's worm, Ikora discovers that Savathun was tricked by the Witness to dive deep and create the Hive. The worm and sword logic was a scheme designed by the Witness to control the Krill and prevent them from gaining the light from the Traveler, which had just arrived on their planet. Savathun herself didn't even know this and is confused and angry when it's revealed. The Guardian takes advantage of this hurt and uses the window of opportunity to put a stop to the ritual and kill Savathun. With her dying breath, she says something absolutely iconic.
Isn't this interesting? I miscalculated. So did you, Guardian. So protective of your Traveler. You wouldn't let me keep it safe. But the Witness is coming. The game is yours to play now. Yours to win or lose. Just don't say I didn't warn you.
It's my favorite line in the entire campaign. After Savathun's death, Amaru escapes with the Traveler as it leaves Savathun's throne world, and the Hidden captures Savathun's body so he can't revive her in the future. There's something hauntingly beautiful about Savathun's story. It's poetic that the goddess of cunning and trickery was herself tricked and manipulated by a greater player in the game. The lore of Witch Queen and its raid vow of disciple explain that the Witness and his first disciple Rulk were grooming Savathun to become a disciple of the Witness. They didn't want Oryx or Xivu Arath, they wanted the Cunning sister. What plans the Witness had for Savathun remain vague as we don't yet know much about the Witness's plans in general for the Traveler, aside from the fact that they want to winnow its garden. Savathun traps Rulk within her throne world and betrays the Witness by taking the light and trying to prevent their plans from coming to fruition. The Guardian intervenes and kills both Rulk and Savathun, but later fails to protect the Traveler from the Witness, just as Savathun predicted upon her death. Savathun's betrayal of both the Worm Gods, Sword Logic, and the Witness stands in stark contrast to her younger sister Xivu Arath. Xivu is not cunning and instead is more of a brute, gaining power through pure violence and war. She has no reason to abandon the sword logic because in her mind, a good soldier does not question their orders. They use violence to achieve their objectives no matter the cost. Xivu is another foil for Savathun, being unquestioning and her faith in the sword logic never wavering. Xivu is angered by Oryx's death but is even more incensed by his murderers failing to seize the taken throne for themselves. She would be willing to serve the Guardian if they took the taken throne by force because they had proven themselves in combat. Xivu only respects the person who is strong enough to defeat their enemies because to her, war is the ultimate act of love and devotion. Savathun is different. She's inquisitive, using information as a weapon, tricking her enemies so she naturally comes to distrust the Witness and the Worms. Xivu is angered by her older sister's deviation from the sword logic and abandonment of the Worm. It was Savathun who listened to their father's worm familiar and convinced her siblings to dive deep into Fundament's ocean, but Xivu is the last one standing, the final true believer. This provides a fascinating contrast between the two personalities of the sisters that I'm sure will continue to pan out upon Savathun's return. The Traveler resurrecting Savathun is a very interesting dilemma for the Vanguard. Their god, who they believe is righteous and worthy of protection, has blessed one of their worst enemies with the light. It causes a crisis of faith where they realize that their god might not be as benevolent as it seems and might simply be doing the same thing as Savathun, manipulating people in increasingly desperate attempts to survive. I find this crisis very interesting because it makes us re-examine the Traveler and wonder what its true motivations are. The Traveler has abandoned previous civilizations as an attempt to survive, including the Elixni. Who's to say it wouldn't abandon humanity if it needed to? The Witch Queen also has the effect of making the player question the morality of the Vanguard and their player character themselves. If the Traveler is potentially selfish and malevolent, what does that say about us and our allies? We've done many terrible things in the name of the Traveler, so are our hands truly clean? It's an interesting thing to consider. Savathun trying to protect the Traveler also makes us reconsider her motivations and morality. Is she doing the right thing? Is she really as bad as we think she is? Whether or not we should forgive Savathun for trying to save the Traveler is hard to say. I love characters like her because they can help us wrestle with and think critically about difficult moral questions. In real life, the stakes are so much higher, so it's hard to truly engage with ideas like this. Savathun has done terrible and potentially unforgivable things. I find it hard to render complete judgment without more context though. What was her motivation for doing the things we abhor? Oryx and the Witness asked Savathun to do terrible things, commit genocide in their names. If she was a real person, I probably would never forgive her, but when she's fictional and the stakes are lower, it's harder to say that for sure. Is my reaction in real life moral? Would I forgive her? Is it worth considering forgiveness? Is it wrong to say that some people are beyond forgiveness? It's something I wrestle with morally. Savathun seems to delight in some of the theatrics and scheming, but is that an authentic response? Did she condition herself to behave that way because she believed that her only path for survival was to follow the sword logic, which requested that she be a cunning schemer? She clearly believed that, at least at first. Later, she began to disagree with her brother and broke ranks with the rest of the Hive. However, it's unclear exactly when she woke up. Was it gradual? Did she slowly come to realize the religion and blood tithe of the Hive was a chain wrapped around the necks of her and her siblings? Or was it a realization sparked by something that happened to her? In reality, it's probably both. It's hard for me to fault someone who does terrible things to survive because I can empathize with it. I can relate. I've never done anything as remotely terrible as Savathun's worst crimes, but I have done things I personally consider wrong. When I told you I hate lying and think it's wrong in most situations, I was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. That axiom is something I've always thought was true, but I violated it repeatedly as a child. I was born in the late 90s. The social atmosphere when I was a young child was very different than today or even 10 years ago. Like it or not, our formative years have a heavy influence on how we behave. Growing up, I always knew that I was a girl, but I also saw that people like me, children born into a body that is considered male, were not permitted to be girls. Some of my youngest memories, starting at age 4, involve wanting to be a girl, and yet I knew that wasn't allowed of me. I was treated differently than my sister, and I saw how people society considered boys, but who wanted to be girls, were treated. As young as 7, I remember experiencing an intense shame for these feelings, the kind no child should ever have to face, especially at that age. I desperately wanted the thoughts to go away, but they wouldn't no matter how hard I tried. I learned to suppress them, build walls around them, until it was possible for me to truthfully believe I didn't have them. Yet they would always return when I was no longer being observed. It makes telling stories from my childhood complicated. There are two narratives diametrically opposed that coexist. It makes some memories not make sense until you view them in that context of trauma and compartmentalization. I knew that I was a girl from age 4 but didn't have the language to express that truth, and yet was surprised when I finally figured out what was going on inside my head at age 19 when I learned I was trans. Yet that was way after I learned what a trans person was. Denial is a horrible thing, but I needed it to survive. I had to lie and convince myself I liked being a boy because it wasn't safe safe enough for me to tell the truth. Even now, talking about this is complicated because I've experienced harassment for speaking publicly about this in the past. It's still not completely safe for me to talk about my identity, but it's a lot safer than it used to be. There wasn't enough acceptance and safety for me to let down my internal defenses and start reckoning with it until about 5 years ago. Even in the closet, insisting that I was a boy, I was bullied and abused as a child. I was called slurs and physically attacked by my peers in school because they thought that I was too effeminate and assumed I was gay. If I had been openly trans, it would have been so much worse, so I lied to survive. It's why I relate to Savathun and find her so compelling even though I despise how she operates. I hate lying, but I lied for the first 19 years of my life to survive. The contradiction in my life makes it easier to see the good in Savathun, the potential contradictions inside her life. That doesn't mean I believe she's justified or that she even should be forgiven, because there are some things that should never be forgiven. But it's much harder for me to render judgment when I know what it feels like to do things you don't agree with to survive. The real test for Savathun will be what she does when she's no longer in a life or death situation. What I did is I started to transition and stopped lying. How will she behave when she isn't fighting for her survival anymore? In Season 22, the Vanguard will be backed against a wall, forced to make an impossible decision. Do they ally with one of their worst enemies to defeat the Witness, or do they stick to their morals and potentially lose the coming fight? Savathun put it best herself. The game is now ours to win or lose. We need to decide what our endgame is going to look like and if Savathun is a pawn we're going to play. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider checking out my video I made recently on retcons, unveiling, and the Witness. It'll be linked on screen. My name is eforme, and I would like to thank you for watching.